Namaste. I'm just getting set up still. Hi, Nikhil. Welcome. Sorry, it's been a while since I've read here, so just getting things set up. Just making sure everything's working. Welcome. So I'm going to just start with a Muji meditation. I think it's about 19 or 20 minutes, and then I'm going to read from Ramana Maharshi, Be As You Are. Salutations to our beloved masters, Sri Muji Ji, Sri Ananta Ji, Om Namah Shivaya. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the Muji meditation.
We will begin today's meditation with the chanting of Om 3 times. Om Anachala. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Om Babaji ki Jai. Om Buddha Ji ki Jai. Om Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Observe. There is a stillness inside you that has been here before the beginning of time itself. It's unalterable. It simply is. It has no name, has no form, has no texture. Inside it, this body itself is felt. The functioning senses, all sensations flow inside this infinite space of being. There's no such thing as a person here. Only pure awareness. Ideas such as this or that, or getting closer, or moving away from, are only imagined. There's only this. Truly, there's only this. Be aware of this. The awareness of this and this are the same. The feeling of being here now is due to the presence of being. This being is not a person. It has no religion, has no belief. It is earlier than the formation of mind, earlier than thought, earlier than any sensation. Know this deep within your being. I is this. The actions, reactions, interactions of the mind and body do not trouble this. The sense of individuality, of otherness, arise in this as purely imagined, pure dream. It is not wrong, but it is not this. Watch the breath, rising and falling. Feel the subtle hum of existence, all appearing in this that has no name, has no form, has no beginning, has no end. Subtler than even the beingness itself. It has no name. It does not call itself truth or untruth. It causes the powers of imagination, of thought, intellect, memory, identity, belief to operate in the domain of consciousness. Do not put any pictures to it. It is it that is aware of its own self, not another. It plays I and you and other, but essentially it is indivisible, timeless, flawless, perfect beyond even the concept of perfection. It is yourself. Be one with this. The comings and the goings of the mind and the body do not affect this. They derive their meaning from this. when it manifests, the creative power emanating from this, we know as love. We are this love. There's nothing to imagine or to create here, now. There's nothing incomplete. There's no work to be done on behalf of this. There's no leaving this or re-entering this. These are dreamed. There's only this. We are this. Knowing this, then you may play as that, yet remain this. This cannot be shared. It cannot be lost. It cannot be separated. These are mere ideas arising in this. We are this. I is this. You are this. That is this. The sense I am arises from this. The subtle intuition, the knowingness I am perceiving arises from this, in this. This is this. That is this. This is that. This is. Observe the senses, present and functioning according to their own laws, unforced. Notice. Don't combine. You cannot be pinpointed. There are no coordinates for you. Being everywhere equally. There are no images, no photographs of this. There is no left or right, up or down, in or out for this. This is not delicate. It does not need looking after. It does not depend upon a you. Know yourself as identical, one with that. There's no need to try to be this, because your very efforts already appear in this. Be aware of this. Stay as awareness. Om. In a few moments, you'll hear the sound of the bell. Just an indication that you may open your eyes or move about, but it will not make any difference to your inmost state. Be aware of this and confirm now. Can this itself fade? Is there any such meaning for this? Can it be lost? And by whom? Powerful effects will come from that region we call mind, like a spell that makes you feel separated, but know deep within your being, this too is an illusion. Om, Om Namah Shivaya, Om, Om Shri Arunachala, Om, Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya, Om, Papaji Ki Jai, Om, Buddha Ki Jai, Om, Christ Ki Jai, Om, Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj Ki Jai, Om, Shri Yogi Ram Surat Kumar Ki Jai, Om, Mahadeva Ki Jai, Om, Shri Nanda Ma Ki Jai, Om, Shri Krishna Ki Jai, Om, Shri Ram Ki Jai, Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om.
So I'm reading from Ramana Maharshi, Be As You Are. And I'm sort of jumping around a little bit, so I was just feeling to read from chapter 4. It's a chapter on self-inquiry and theory. And there's a few chapters on self-inquiry, so it starts with theory, and then there's another chapter on practice, and then another one on misconception. So I'll just start with the theory, and we'll see how far we go. So happy to have you here join me. Okay, so I'm reading it from my computer, so I'll just check back and forth to see if there's any comments or anything in the chat. And anyone's welcome to join the Hangout if you want. You can watch from YouTube. So, and just feel free to let me know if I'm reading too fast or whatever. Okay. So part 2, inquiry and surrender. I exist. Excuse me. I exist is the only permanent, self-evident experience of everyone. Nothing else is so self-evident as I am. What people call self-evident, that is, the experience they get through the senses, is far from self-evident. The self alone is that. So to do self-inquiry and be that I am is the only thing to do. I am is reality. I am this or that is unreal. I am is truth, another name for self. Devotion is nothing more than knowing oneself. In scrutiny, supreme devotion and jnana are in nature one and the same. To say that one of these two is a means to the other is due to not knowing the nature of either of them. Know that the path of jnana and the path of devotion are interrelated. Follow these inseparable two paths without dividing one from the other. Okay, so chapter 4, self-inquiry theory. It will be remembered that in the chapter on self-awareness and self-ignorance, Sri Ramana maintained that self-realization could be brought about merely by giving up the idea that there is an individual self which functions through the body and mind. A few of his advanced devotees were able to do this quickly and easily, but the others found it virtually impossible to discard the ingrained habits of a lifetime without undertaking some form of spiritual practice. Sri Ramana sympathized with their predicament, and whenever he was asked to prescribe a spiritual practice which would facilitate self-awareness, he would recommend a technique called self-inquiry. This practice was the cornerstone of his practical philosophy, and the next 3 chapters will be devoted to a detailed presentation of all its aspects. Before embarking on a description of the technique itself, it will be necessary to explain Sri Ramana's views on the nature of the mind, since the aim of self-inquiry is to discover, by direct experience, that the mind is non-existent. According to Sri Ramana, every conscious activity of the mind or body revolves around the tacit assumption that there is an I who is doing something. The common factor in I think, I remember, I am acting is the I who assumes that it is responsible for all these activities. Sri Ramana called this common factor the I thought. Literally, okay, there's a word here I don't know, but it just means the I thought. It's aman vritti. I don't know how to pronounce it. So literally, I thought means mental modification of I. The self, or real I, never imagines that it is doing or thinking anything. The I that imagines all this is a mental fiction, and so it is called a mental modification of the self. Since that is a rather cumbersome translation of aham vritti, it is usually translated as I thought. Sri Ramana upheld the view that the notion of individuality is only the I thought manifesting itself in different ways. Instead of regarding the different activities of the mind, such as ego, intellect, and memory, as separate functions, he preferred to view them all as different forms of the I thought. Since he equated individuality with the mind and the mind with the I thought, it follows that the disappearance of the sense of individuality, self-realization, implies the disappearance of both the mind and the I thought. This is confirmed by his frequent statements to the effect that after self-realization, there is no thinker of thoughts, no performer of actions, and no awareness of individual existence. Since he upheld the notion that the self is the only existing reality, he regarded the I thought as a mistaken assumption which has no real existence of its own. He explained its appearance by saying that it can only appear to exist by identifying with an object. When thoughts arise, the I thought claims ownership of them. I think, I believe, I want, I am acting. But there is no separate I thought that exists independently of the objects that it is identifying with. It only appears to exist as a real continuous entity because of the incessant flow of identification which are continually taking place. Almost all these identifications can be traced back to an initial assumption that the I is limited to the body, either as an owner-occupant or coextensive with its physical form. This I am the body idea is the primary source of all subsequent wrong identification, and its dissolution is the primary aim of self-inquiry. Sri Ramana maintained that this tendency towards self-limiting identifications could be checked by trying to separate the subject I from the objects of thought which it identified with. Since the individual I thought cannot exist without an object, if attention is focused on the subjective feeling of I or I am, with such intensity that the thoughts I am this or I am that do not arise, then the individual I will be unable to connect with objects. If the awareness of I is sustained, the individual I, the I thought, will disappear, and in its place, there will be a direct experience of the self. This constant attention to the inner awareness of I or I am was called self-inquiry by Sri Ramana, and he constantly recommended it as the most efficient and direct way of discovering the unreality of the I thought. In Sri Ramana's terminology, the I thought rises from the self or the heart and subsides back into the self when its tendency to identify itself with thought object ceases. Because of this, he often tailored his advice to conform to this image of a rising and subsiding I. He might say, trace the I thought back to its source, or find out where the I thought arises from. But the implication was always the same. Whatever the language he used was advising his devotees to maintain awareness of the I thought until it dissolved in the source from which it came. He sometimes mentioned that thinking or repeating I mentally would also lead one in the direction, but it is important to note that this is only a preliminary stage of the practice. The repetition of I still involves a subject, the I thought, having a perception of an object, the thoughts, I, and while such duality exists, the I thought will continue to thrive. It only finally disappears when the perception of all objects, both physical and mental, ceases. This is not brought about by being aware of an I, but only by being the I. This stage of experiencing the subject, rather than being aware of an object, is the culminating phase of self-inquiry, and it will be explained in greater detail in the following chapter. This important distinction is the key element which distinguishes self-inquiry from all other spiritual practices, and it explains why Sri Ramana consistently maintained that most other practices were ineffective. He often pointed out that traditional meditations and yoga practices necessitate the existence of a subject who meditates on an object, and he would usually add that such a relationship sustained the I thought instead of eliminating it. In his view, such practices may effectively quieten the mind, and they may even produce blissful experiences, but they will never culminate in self-realization because the I thought is not being isolated and deprived of its identity. So the conversations which comprise this chapter mostly deal with Sri Ramana's view on the theoretical background of self-inquiry. And then it says the actual practice of self-inquiry will be explained in greater detail in chapter 5. I'm just going to check the chat. Hello, beloved Priya. So happy for you to be here. Oh, hey, Pekka. Nice to see you in the hangout. And you're welcome to say anything if you feel to. Well, otherwise, I'll just keep reading. So the theory is a little more dry, but we'll keep going through and then see what happens. Okay. So the question, what is the nature of the mind? The mind is nothing other than the I thought. The mind and the ego are one and the same. The other mental faculties, such as the intellect and the memory, are only this: mind, intellect, the storehouse of mental tendencies, and ego. All these are only the one mind itself. This is like different names being given to a man according to his different functions. The individual soul, jiva, is nothing but this soul or ego. Question: how shall we discover the nature of the mind, that is, the ultimate cause, or the nomenon, I don't know if I said that right, nomenon of which it is a manifestation? Bhagavan. Arranging thoughts in the order of value. Arranging thoughts in the order of value. The I thought is the all-important thought. Personality, idea, or thought is also the root or the stem of all other thoughts, since each idea or thought arises only as someone's thought, and it is not known to exist independently of the ego. The ego therefore exhibits thought activity. The second and third persons, he, you, that, etc., do not appear except to the first person, I. Therefore, they arise only after the first person appears. So all the three persons seem to rise and sink together. Trace, then, the ultimate cause of I, or personality. From where does this I arise? Seek for it within, it then vanishes. This is the pursuit of wisdom. When the mind unceasingly investigates its own nature, it transpires that there is no such thing as mind. This is a direct path for all. The mind is merely thoughts. Of all thoughts, the thought I is the root. Therefore, the mind is only the thought I. The birth of the I thought is one's own birth. Its death is the person's death. After the I thought has arisen, the wrong identity with the body arises. Get rid of the I thought. So long as I is alive, there is grief. When I ceases to exist, there is no grief. The questioner. Yes, but when I take to the I thought, other thoughts arise and disturb me. Bhagavan. See whose thoughts they are. They will vanish. They have their single root. They have the root in the single I thought. Hold it, and they will disappear. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay. Question. How can any inquiry initiated by the ego reveal its own unreality? Bhagavan. The ego's phenomenal existence is transcended when you dive into the source from where the I thought rises. Question. But is not the amen vritti, which I think means I thought, is not the I thought only one of the three forms in which the ego manifests itself? Yoga Vasishta and other ancient texts describe the ego as having a threefold form. Bhagavan. It is so. The ego is described as having three bodies, the gross, the subtle, and the casual. But that is only for the purpose of analytical exposition. If the method of inquiry were to depend on the ego's form, you may take it that any inquiry would become altogether impossible, because the forms the ego may assume are legion. Therefore, for the purpose of self-inquiry, you have to proceed on the basis that the ego has but one form, namely the I thought. Questioner. But it may prove inadequate for realizing jnana. Bhagavan. Self-inquiry by following the clue of I thought is just like the dog tracing his master by his scent. The master may be at some distant unknown place. That does not stand in the way of his dog tracing him. The master's scent is an infallible clue for the animal, and nothing else, such as the dress he wears or his build or stature, etc., counts. To that scent, the dog holds on undistractedly while searching for him, and finally it succeeds in tracing him. Questioner. The question still remains why the quest for the source of I thought, as distinguished from other vrittis, which are modifications of the mind, should be considered the direct means to self-realization. So the questioner is wondering why the quest for the source of the I thought should be considered the direct means to self-realization. Bhagavan. Although the concept of I-ness or I amness is by usage known as the I thought, It is not really a modification like other modifications of the mind. Because unlike other modifications which have no essential interrelation, the I thought is equally and essentially related to each and every modification of the mind. Without the I thought, there can be no other modification, but the I thought can subsist by itself without depending on any other modification. So actually, I think I'm just going to skip to the next chapter, if that's okay, because I just feel like starting reading some of the practice of self-inquiry that Ramana shares about. So I'm just kind of stopping mid-chapter. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so chapter 5, self-inquiry practice. So beginners in self-inquiry were advised by Sri Ramana to put their attention on the inner feeling of I, and to hold that feeling as long as possible. They would be told that if their attention was distracted by other thoughts, they should revert to awareness of the I thought whenever they became aware that their attention had wandered. He suggested various aids to assist this process. One could ask oneself, who am I? Or where does this I come from? But the ultimate aim was to be continuously aware of the I, which assumes that it is responsible for all the activities of the body and mind. In the early stages of practice, attention to the feeling I is a mental activity which takes the form of a thought or perception. As the practice develops, the thought I gives way to a subjectively experienced feeling of I. And when this feeling ceases to connect and identify with thoughts and objects, it completely vanishes. What remains is an experience of being, in which the sense of individuality has temporarily ceased to operate. The experience may be intermittent at first, but with repeated practice, it becomes easier and easier to reach and maintain. When self-inquiry reaches this level, there is an effortless awareness of being in which individual effort is no longer possible because the I who makes the effort has temporarily ceased to exist. It is not self-realization, since the I thought periodically reasserts itself, but it is the highest level of practice. Repeated experience of this state of being weakens and destroys the vasanas, mental tendencies, which cause the I thought to rise. And when their hold has been sufficiently weakened, the power of the self destroys the residual tendencies so completely that the I thought never rises again. This is the final and irreversible state of self-realization. The practice of self-attention or awareness of the I thought is a gentle technique which bypasses the usual repressive methods of controlling the mind. It is not an exercise in concentration, nor does it aim at suppressing thoughts. It merely invokes awareness of the source from which the mind springs. This method, the method and goal of self-inquiry, is to abide in the source of the mind and to be aware of what one really is by withdrawing attention and interest from what one is not. In the early stages, effort in the form of transferring attention from the thoughts to the thinker is essential. But once awareness of the I feeling has been firmly established, further effort is counterproductive. From then on, it is more of a process of being than doing, of effortless being rather than an effort to be. I just love reading this. And it's going to get into some inquiry in a second. Being what one already is effortless, since beingness is always present and always experienced. On the other hand, pretending to be what one is not, i.e. the body and the mind, requires continuous mental effort, even though the effort is nearly always at a subconscious level. It therefore follows that in the higher stages of self-inquiry, effort takes attention away from the experience of being, while the cessation of mental effort reveals it. Ultimately, the self is not discovered as a result of doing anything, but only by being. As Sri Ramana himself once remarked, do not meditate, be. Do not think that you are, be. Don't think you are being, you are. Self-inquiry should not be regarded as a meditation practice that takes place at certain hours and in certain positions. It should continue throughout one's waking hours, irrespective of what one is doing. Sri Ramana saw no conflict between working and self-inquiry. He maintained that with a little practice, it could be done under any circumstances. He did sometimes say that regular periods of formal practice were good for beginners, but he never advocated long periods of sitting meditation, and he always showed his disapproval when any of his devotees expressed a desire to give up their mundane activities in favor of a meditative life. Keep reading. Questioner. You say one can realize the self by a search for it. What is the character of this search? Bhagavan. You are the mind and think that you are the mind. The mind is nothing but thoughts. Now behind every particular thought, there is a general thought, which is the I, that is yourself. Let us call this I the first thought. Stick to this I thought and question it to find out what it is. When this question takes strong hold on you, you cannot think of other thoughts. Questioner. When I do this and cling to myself, that is, the I thought, other thoughts come and go, but I say to myself, who am I? And there is no answer forthcoming. To be in this condition is the practice, is it so? Bhagavan. This is a mistake that people often make. What happens when you make a serious quest for the self is that the I thought disappears and something else from the depths take hold of you that is not the I which commenced the quest. Questioner. What is this something else? Bhagavan. That is the real self, the import of I. It is not the ego. It is the supreme being itself. Questioner. But you have often said that one must reject other thoughts when one begins the quest. But the thoughts are endless. If one thought is rejected, another comes, and there seems to be no end at all. Bhagavan. I do not say that you must go on rejecting thoughts. Cling to yourself, that is, to the I thought. When your interest keeps you to that single idea, other thoughts will automatically get rejected and they will vanish. This is the same as when Muji points us to just stay as a self. You don't have to worry about rejecting anything, just stay as the self. Something like that. Questioner. And so rejection of thoughts is not necessary. Bhagavan, no. It may be necessary for a time or some time. You fancy that there is no end if one goes on rejecting every thought when it rises. It is not true. There is an end. If you are vigilant and make a stern effort to reject every thought when it rises, then you will soon find that you are going deeper and deeper into your own inner self. At that level, it is not necessary to make an effort to reject thoughts. Questioner. Then it is possible to be without effort, without strain. Bhagavan. Not only that, it is impossible for you to make an effort beyond a certain extent. Questioner. I want to be further enlightened. Should I try to make no effort at all? Bhagavan. Here it is impossible for you to be without effort. When you go deeper, it is impossible for you to make any effort. If the mind becomes introverted through inquiry into the source of aham vritti, the vasanas become extinct. The light of the self falls on the vasanas and produces the phenomenon of reflection we call the mind. Thus, when the vasanas become extinct, the mind also disappears, being absorbed into the light of the one reality, the heart. This is the sum and substance of all that an aspirant needs to know. What is imperatively required of him is an earnest and one-pointed inquiry into the source of Aman Vritti, of the I thought. Question. How should a beginner start this practice? Bhagavan. The mind will subside only by means of the inquiry, who am I? The thought, who am I, destroying all other thoughts, will itself finally be destroyed, like the stick used for stirring the funeral pyre. If other thoughts rise, one should, without attempting to complete them, inquire, to whom did they arise? To whom did they arise? What does it matter, however many thoughts rise? At the very moment that each thought rises, if one vigilantly inquires, to whom did this rise? It will be known, to me. If one then inquires, who am I? The mind will turn back to its source, the self, and the thought which had risen will also subside. By repeatedly practicing thus, the power of the mind to abide in its source increases. Although tendencies toward sense objects, which have been reoccurring down the ages, rise in countless numbers like the waves of the ocean, they will all perish as meditation on one's nature becomes more and more intense. Without giving room even to the doubting thought, it is possible to destroy all these tendencies, vasanas, and to remain as the self alone. One should persistently cling fast to self-attention. I'll just read that last sentence again. Without giving room even to the doubting thought, is it possible to destroy all these tendencies, vasanas, and to remain as self alone? one should persistently cling fast to self-attention. As long as there are tendencies towards sense objects in the mind, the inquiry, who am I, is necessary. And Muji invites us to look at, and somehow this one really just touches me, is the inquiry, can the seer be seen? Which is literally the same as who am I? And then Ananta also has a really powerful pointing, am I aware now? As and when thoughts rise, one should annihilate all of them through inquiry, then and there, in their very place of origin. Not attending to what is other is non-attachment and desirelessness. Not leaving self is knowledge. In truth, these two, both desirelessness and knowledge, are one and the same. Just as a pearl diver, tying a stone to his waist, dives into the sea and takes the pearl lying at the bottom, so everyone, diving deep within himself with non-attachment, can attain the pearl of self. If one resorts uninterruptedly to remembrance of one's nature until one attains self, that alone will be sufficient. Inquiring, who am I that is in bondage? And knowing one's real nature alone is liberation. Always keeping the mind fixed in self alone is called self-inquiry. Whereas meditation is thinking oneself to be the absolute, which is existence, consciousness, bliss, Sat Chit Ananda. So I'll just go for a little longer. Actually, I have no idea what time I started at or how long I've been reading. Okay. Questioner. The yogis say that one must renounce this world and go off into secluded jungles if one wishes to find the truth. Bhagavan. The life of action need not be renounced. If you meditate for an hour or two every day, you can then carry on with your duties. If you meditate in the right manner, then the current of mind induced will continue to flow even in the midst of your work. It is as though there were two ways of expressing the same idea. The same line which you take in meditation will be expressed in your activities. Question. What is the result of doing that? Bhagavan. As you go on, you will find that your attitude towards people, events, and objects gradually changes. Your actions will tend to follow your meditation of their accord. Questioner. Then you do not agree with the yogis. Bhagavan. A man should surrender the personal selfishness which binds him to the world. Giving up the false self is the true renunciation. Bhagavan. How is it possible to become selfless while leading a life of worldly activity? Bhagavan. There is no conflict between work and wisdom. Questioner. Do you mean that one can continue all the old activities in one's profession, for instance, and at the same time get enlightenment? Bhagavan. Why not? But in that case, one will not think that it is the old personality which is doing the work, because one's consciousness will gradually become transferred until it is centered in that which is beyond the little self. Questioner. If a person is engaged in work, there will be little time left for him to meditate. Bhagavan. Setting apart time for meditation is only for the merest spiritual novices. A man who is advancing will begin to enjoy the deeper beatitude, whether he is at work or not. While his hands are in society, he keeps his head cool in solitude. That reminds me of when Mujiji just encourages us to keep our mind in our heart as we go through all of our daily activities. Questioner. Then you do not teach the way of yoga. Bhagavan. The yogi tries to drive his mind to the goal, as a cowherd drives a bull with a stick. But on this path, the seeker coaxes the bull by holding out a handful of grass. Questioner. How is that done? Bhagavan. You have to ask yourself the question, who am I? This investigation will lead in the end to the discovery of something within you which is behind the mind. Solve that great problem and you will solve all your problems. Questioner. Seeking the I, there is nothing to be seen. Bhagavan. Because you are accustomed to identify yourself with the body in sight of the eyes, therefore you say you do not see anything. What is there to be seen? Who is to see? How to see? There is only one consciousness which, manifesting as I thought, identifies itself with the body, projects itself through the eyes and sees the objects around. The individual is limited in the waking state and expects to see something different. The evidence of his senses will be the seal of authority. But he will not admit that the seer, the seen, and the seeing are all manifestations of the same consciousness, namely, I. Contemplation helps one to overcome the illusion that the self must be visual. In truth, there is nothing visual. How do you feel the I now? Do you hold a mirror before you to know your own being? The awareness is the I. Realize it, and that is the truth. Questioner. On inquiry into the origin of thoughts, there is a perception of I, but it does not satisfy me. Bhagavan. Quite right. The perception of I is associated with a form, maybe the body. There should be nothing associated with the pure self. The self is the unassociated, pure reality, in whose light the body and ego shine. Unstilling all thoughts, the pure consciousness remains. Just on waking from sleep, and before becoming aware of the world, there is that pure I. Hold on to it without sleeping, or without allowing thoughts to possess you. If that is held firm, it does not matter even if the world is seen. The seer remains unaffected by the phenomenon. What is the ego? Bhagavan continuing. What is the ego? Inquire. The body is insentient and cannot say I. The self is pure consciousness and non-dual. It cannot say I. No one says I in sleep. What is the ego then? It is something intermediate between the inert body and the self. It has no locus standi. If sought for, it vanishes like a ghost. At night, a man may imagine that there is a ghost by his side because of the play of shadows. If he looks closely, he discovers that the ghost is not really there, and what he imagined to be a ghost was merely a tree or a post. If he does not look closely, the ghost may terrify him. All that is required is to look closely, and the ghost vanishes. The ghost was never there. So also with the ego. It is an intangible link between the body and pure consciousness. It is not real. So long as one does not look closely at it, it continues to give trouble. But when one looks for it, it is found not to exist. There is another story which illustrates this. In Hindu marriage functions, the feast often continue for 5 or 6 days. On one of these occasions, a stranger was mistaken for the best man by the bride's party, and they therefore treated him with special regard. Seeing him treated with special regard by the bride's party, the bridegroom's party considered him to be some man of importance related to the bride's party, and therefore they too showered him with special respect. The stranger had altogether a happy time of it. He was also all along aware of the real situation. On one occasion, the groom's party wanted to refer to him on some point, and so they asked the bride's party about him. Immediately, he scented trouble and made himself scarce. So it is with the ego. If looked for, it disappears. If not, it continues to give trouble. Questioner. If I try to make the who am I inquiry, I fall into sleep. What should I do? Bhagavan. Persist in the inquiry throughout your waking hours. That would be quite enough. If you keep on making the inquiry till you fall asleep, the inquiry will go during sleep also. Take up the inquiry again as soon as you wake up. Questioner. How can I get peace? I do not seem to I do not seem to obtain it through self-inquiry. Bhagavan. Peace is your natural state. It is the mind that obstructs the natural state. If you do not experience peace, it means that your inquiry has been made only in the mind. Investigate what the mind is, and it will disappear. There is no such thing as mind apart from thought. Nevertheless, because of the emergence of thought, you surmise something from which it starts and term that the mind. When you probe to see what it is, you will find there is really no such thing as mind. When the mind has thus vanished, you realize eternal peace. So I think this might be a good place to pause for now. I think I'm just going to sit quietly for a minute or two, and then I'll just pick up here next time I read the same point. Thank you so much. Mujiji Ki J. Nantaje Ki J. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Love you so much.